Hello my dear friends and welcome to StudyIQ. I am Joycey Joy and today in this lecture we will discuss about the disinvestment program in India and how successful was the disinvestment program in India. So it will be a disinvestment evaluation. Now first of all, coming to the current affairs. If we look into the public sector disinvestment program in India, for the last years, the public sector disinvestment program has met its target for the second year. But there are various criticisms that the central government has resorted to multiple shortcuts in order to achieve the targets of disinvestment. And while achieving the targets of disinvestment, the government undertook various shortcuts. Now, the shortcuts that were undertaken by the government had diluted or undermined the basic objectives of disinvestment. So we will evaluate this in detail in this lecture. Now, before moving on, first let us understand what is meant by disinvestment. So disinvestment means withdrawal or reduction of an investment. So it is done through selling or liquidating an asset or a subsidiary. Now the basic objective of disinvestment is to transfer the ownership of a public sector undertaking or a public sector company to that of the private sector, and by transferring the ownership, the government would instead be receiving certain sum of money which is called the proceedings of disinvestment, and this proceedings of disinvestment can be effectively utilized by the government in order to address the fiscal deficit of the country. So this is the basic objective of disinvestment. So strategic disinvestment means government is transferring the ownership of a government owned company to a private sector, and in return government receives the proceedings of disinvestment which can be used by the government to meet its expenses or to bring down the fiscal deficit of the country. So necessarily disinvestment aims towards achieving fiscal consolidation. So hope you have a brief understanding about what is disinvestment and what are the primary objectives of disinvestment. Now let us move on to evaluate the disinvestment program in India in the last few years. But before we begin, this is our channel StudyIQ and we are providing pen drive courses for various competitive examinations including SSC and bank courses, UPSC optionals, SSC JE courses, teaching examination, railway examinations, defense examinations, RBI grade B, NABARD grade A, UGC NET, UPSC Civil Services Examination, CLAT exams for various state PSCs and also for various professional courses. You can visit our website www.studyiq.com for more details, or you can call to any of these numbers for more information. Now let us first understand what is a new development in the disinvestment program in India. The government, that is the union government, in the Union Budget 2018-19 fixed a target of disinvestment. So this target was rupees 800 billion. So a rupees 800 billion target was fixed by the union government in its 2018-19 budget, and till the end of February 2019, the government managed to raise rupees 56,473 crore through disinvestments. So it did not meet the target by February 2019. So what did the government do? The government managed to end the financial year 2018-19 by meeting the disinvestment target. So 85,000 crore rupees disinvestment target was achieved by the government. So we will see what were the modes adopted by the government, what were the steps taken by the government later in this lecture itself. But before moving on into it, let us first understand how disinvestment would be helpful for the fiscal condition. So excess of government expenditure over government's revenue is called fiscal deficit, and increasing fiscal deficit is a threat for fiscal consolidation. So what the government has to do, either decrease the expenditure or increase the revenue. So one way of increasing the revenue for the government is disinvestment. So we have learned about disinvestment proceedings. So by increasing the disinvestment, the government revenue or the disinvestment proceedings will increase, and that is a good news for the fiscal condition of the economy. So this is how fiscal deficit can be properly managed by increasing the disinvestments. So government has achieved its target of disinvestment. Now what has to be seen is that how did the government manage to achieve this disinvestment target. So we will learn about the modes adopted by the government to achieve this disinvestment target. Now, out of the total proceedings of rupees 85,000 crore disinvestments, only 2/3 has been contributed by the actual dilution of center's ownership stakes in PSUs. So we have first seen what is disinvestment. So disinvestment means the sale of government shares in the public sector undertakings. So it definitely means that there is a dilution of center government's ownership in the public sector undertakings. So disinvestment necessarily involves dilution of the share of the government in public sector undertakings. Now, only 2/3 of the total proceedings of the disinvestment were from dilution of center's ownership, and this 2/3 disinvestments came from sources like ETF, that is exchange traded funds, IPOs, that is initial public offerings, and offers for sale. So here we can say that only 2/3 has met the basic objective of disinvestment, that is transferring the ownership to private entities and thereby getting the disinvestment proceedings. And now what happened with the rest 1/3 of the shares? So in many instances we have seen that many capital intensive PSUs like the ONGC, IOC, Indian Oil Corporation, BHEL, Bharat Heavy Electronics Limited, etc. These are all capital intensive PSUs. So they had to announce share buybacks. So what is meant by a share buyback? Share buyback means that repurchasing of shares of stock by the company that issued them. Now, for example, ONGC has issued certain shares, and these shares are repurchased by ONGC itself. That is called repurchase of shares or share buybacks. So to make it clear, a buyback of share happens when the issuing company, in our example ONGC is the issuing company, pays shareholders the market value per share and reabsorbs that portion of ownership it had previously distributed to the private investors. So this is called share buyback. So the rest 1/3 of the disinvestment took place through share buybacks or buyback of the shares by the PSUs. And the share buybacks has supported the disinvestment targets by around 10,000 crore. So a 10,000 crore share buyback has taken place. And in the last minute, various other efforts were also taken by the government in order to meet the shortfall of the disinvestment target. So we have already discussed this issue in a previous lecture. The center had also initiated transfer of its controlling stake in REC to that of PFC. REC is Rural Electrification Corporation, PFC is Power Finance Corporation. So the shares of REC were transferred to PFC or Power Finance Corporations. So we can say that the buyback of shares and this transfer of REC shares to PFC, these were two shortcuts adopted by the central government in order to meet its disinvestment targets. Now let us understand what are the concerns here. So as we discussed in the previous slide, the government has adopted various shortcuts like transferring of shares from one PSU to other or buyback of shares, etc. These were all some of the shortcuts adopted by the government in order to raise funds. So here we will see that the government had compromised both the objectives of disinvestment and the long-term interest of the disinvestments. So the objective of disinvestment is to provide a fiscal health to the government and also to transfer the shares to private sector. So these objectives were not met, and also the long-term interest were also compromised. And with regard to buyback of shares, we have seen that the PSU itself buys or purchases the shares issued by the same PSU. So here we will see that there is no material change in the ownership of shares. So one major objective of disinvestment is to transfer the public sector undertaking share to the private sector. So this objective is not met because when there is a buyback of shares, there is no material change in the ownership of the shares. So these were all the concerns. Now coming to the implications of it. Now we have seen that the government has concentrated more on the ends or the goals or the targets of the government. So how it has to be achieved, that is the means to achieve the goals were given less focus. That is why government adopted various shortcuts in order to achieve the goals or the targets of the disinvestment program. So here we will see there was a compromise made on the means. The long-term interest and the objectives of the disinvestment were compromised. So what can be done is that out of the various methods experimented by the government for disinvestment, ETF proves to be the most successful. So ETF refers to exchange traded funds, and they have emerged as the most successful disinvestment route for the government. And through ETF, Bharat 22 and CPSE ETFs, they have raised over 45,000 crore rupees. So from this past experiences, government can stick on to ETF route rather than resorting to other shortcuts in order to merely achieve the targets and goals of disinvestment. And moreover, government should see disinvestment as a economic reform rather than just a means to raise certain revenue. So in this regard, the government should take up the long pending privatization of loss-making PSUs. So those loss-making PSUs must be immediately privatized. This is as a part of economic reforms. So disinvestment should not only have the objective of raising some funds and to meet the fiscal deficit targets, but it should also focus on economic reforms. Thereby, government should focus on privatizing the loss-making public sector undertakings. You can find the PDF of this lecture on my Facebook page, and you can also follow my Facebook page for more updates of my video lectures. And you can also write to me on joycey.studyiq@gmail.com. Thank you.